Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt, and I want to welcome people joining us this week on the Yoto podcast platform. Now, just so you know, most of the bedtime stories I tell here are standalone stories. But over the last year, we have been dipping in and out of the epic story of Odysseus, the hero from ancient Greek mythology. And this week, I'm going to be telling the second last installment of that tale. So if you can jump in right here, that'll be fine. I'm sure you'll pick it all up. But if you did want to go back to the beginning and start from the first episode, you can search back through the episodes. The first episode's called Odysseus, as told by Nanny Piggins, and it dropped on January 8th, 2025. Or you can go back and listen to any of the other episodes. You're going to find fairy tales, myths, legends, and mysteries. I hope you enjoy them all. Now let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. All right, well, I'm back. Thank you for bearing with me while I had a couple of weeks where I couldn't record. I hope you enjoyed the reruns. I just got overwhelmed by book week. Book week gets pretty intense for us authors. A lot of travel, well, this year I haven't gone interstate as much because my daughter is doing the HSC, her final year at high school. So, I have been driving back and forth to Sydney a lot, which means that I can sleep at home, but it is also exhausting driving up and down the freeway to Sydney every day. And then last week I was up in Emerald, which is in central Queensland, which it's always really fun to go up there. It's so different and the weather's so lovely. And I had a great time talking to all the kids and teachers and parents. So thank you very much for having me. And while I was in Emerald, just so you know, authors love going to kids authors love going to kids literary festivals because, you know, it's kind of a solitary job. I'm at home here, writing my books and recording my podcasts. But when we go to literary festivals, they always get together like 8 or 9 of us, children's authors and illustrators, and they put us in a hotel together and we're being driven around in minivans together. And we have so much fun, catching up and sharing advice and telling stories about things that have happened. So that was so much fun to catch up with everyone up there. And I was in the minivan on the way to the airport thinking about how I was going to have to return to my actual real life. And I said to all the other authors, I don't suppose anybody's got a good idea for a podcast story. And bless Lily Wilkinson, she did have a couple of good ideas, and she pitched to me this idea that I'm going to do today. She told me about the story of Tam Lin, which is a Scottish folktale. So thank you, Lily, for suggesting this one. I looked it up and it's a good story. In future weeks, I'll probably get back into the Greek myths, but I thought, I might as well do something a little bit different. And yeah, I really like the story. So when it was fresh in my mind, I thought I'd do it for you today. Before we get into it, I have just one more thing to remind you. The Christmas shows in Sydney, Canberra and Hobart, Tasmania are all on sale now. Tickets are on sale and they're clicking over. The tickets are going. So I realise it's September. It seems a bit early to be thinking about things that are happening in December. But if you would like to come, hop on that and get a ticket because I would hate for you to miss out. All right. Okay, well, let's get into it. Here we go. The Legend of Tam Lin, as told by Nanny Piggins. So, are you planning to go back to school again this week? Asked Nanny Piggins. It was Sunday evening. Nanny Piggins, Boris and the children, Derek, Samantha and Michael, had just finished their evening meal. Nanny Piggins had served bread and butter pudding. Only the way she made it, it didn't contain any bread, just butter, and sliced chocolate croissants baked in chocolate custard. Nanny Piggins maintained that since custard contained eggs and milk, it was full of protein and therefore even more nutritious than regular chocolate pudding. They would, however, be having regular chocolate pudding for dessert later because Nanny Piggins didn't believe in eating too much food that was nutritious because she didn't want to endanger the children by clogging their arteries with nutrients. You ask if we're going to go back to school every Sunday night, said Derek. You know education is compulsory and we have to go 5 days a week. It just seems so unreasonable and inflexible. I can't believe they keep up such a ridiculous system, said Nanny Piggins. History is full of people having uprisings to overthrow brutal and cruel governments. I can't believe that no one has overthrown our government yet for maintaining such a diabolical system of child imprisonment. Education is good for us, said Michael. It'll help us get a job one day. The fact that you think that is a good thing shows how thoroughly you've been brainwashed by your educational overlords, said Nanny Piggins. You know they prefer it when you call them teachers, Samantha reminded her. Besides, tomorrow won't be so bad, said Michael. We've got an excursion. You do? Exclaimed Nanny Piggins. Why didn't you say so? Is it somewhere good, like a fun park, or a water slide, or better yet, a chocolate factory with a fun park and water slide attached? I do wish I'd known. I would have volunteered to be a chaperone. No, nothing like that, said Samantha. We're studying ecosystems as part of the geography curriculum, so they're taking us to a forest. What? Exclaimed Nanny Piggins. No, wailed Boris. Please say you'll be observing it through binoculars from a safe distance, begged Nanny Piggins. No, said Samantha. They're taking us on a nature walk through the forest. Say it isn't so, wailed Boris, as he grabbed all three children in a big bear hug. The children couldn't really respond at this point. It's hard to speak when you're being hugged by a 700-kilogram bear. Don't they know how dangerous forests can be? Demanded Nanny Piggins. Can they? Said Derek, when Boris finally released his grip a little because he was weeping so hard he couldn't hold on as tightly. They're the most dangerous place in the universe, said Nanny Piggins. What, even more dangerous than the inside of a cannon? Asked Michael. Of course, said Nanny Piggins. The inside of a cannon is as safe as sandwiches in comparison. In a cannon, you know you're going to be blasted hundreds of meters into the sky and land goodness knows where, so you can prepare for it by putting on a helmet or getting your lovely brother to put a mattress on the ground that you can land on. In a forest, who knows what might happen to you? You'll be attacked by wolves, wept Boris, just like poor little Red Riding Hood. Or a huntsman, like poor Snow White, said Nanny Piggins. Or you're going to get hit on the head by acorns, like poor Chicken Licken, sobbed Boris. Oh, yes, the fruits and vegetables are as bad as the monsters, said Nanny Piggins. Just ask Snow White. The huntsman didn't get her, but the poisoned apple did. I'm sure we'll be fine, said Derek. We promised to watch out for wolves, huntsmen, acorns and apples. Maybe you should wear bicycle helmets just in case, said Nanny Piggins. That'll protect you from the acorns at least, and you can headbutt the wolves and the huntsmen. If you have a proper breakfast with ample chocolate, you should be able to resist the apples. But what will you do if you come across Tam Lin? Oh, no, said Boris. There's no escaping Tam Lin. Who's Tam Lin? Asked Derek. Don't they teach you anything at your school? Demanded Nanny Piggins. I think we firmly established that they teach nothing you approve of, said Samantha. It's a wonder, with such lamentable cultural ignorance, that you've survived as long as you have, said Nanny Piggins. Oh, Sarah, you must explain who Tam Lin is, so they know how to protect themselves tomorrow in the forest. All right, I will, said Nanny Piggins. Gather around. No, wait. First, fetch the big bowl of chocolate pudding I made for dessert. You must pay attention, and nothing helps focus the mind like a chocolate pudding. So the children did as they were told. They all gathered around the big bowl of pudding, with spoons in hand, as Nanny Piggins began her tale. My story begins all the way back in the olden Scottish story days, when people were scared to go into the forest because of Tam Lin, the fairy, said Nanny Piggins. What's so scary about a fairy? Asked Samantha. Samantha Green, have you not been paying attention to the stories I've told you? Asked Nanny Piggins. There are fairies and then there are fairies. Tam Lin wasn't one of those fairies like you get in French fairy tales, like Cinderella, that have magic wands and give pretty girls dresses so they can go to balls, or magic dancing shoes so they can also go to balls. French fairies are so fashion-orientated now I think about it. No, Tam Lin was a proper fairy. He was a fairy knight in the service of the fairy queen. I thought fairies were all girls, said Michael. Nanny Piggins sighed. When I agreed to become a nanny, I never realised how onerous the job of undoing all the ingrained cultural prejudices of humans would be. You're lucky I love you so much and that I'm determined to overcome these obstacles. Tam Lin was a Celtic fairy from the ancient Scottish fairy days, and Celtic fairies do not mess about. Forget the fairies you've seen in Disney movies. Scottish fairies are more like a gang of magical, lawless hoodlums that would torment anyone who crossed their paths. And Tam Lin was the most feared fairy of them all, said Nanny Piggins. What did he do? Burn villages to the ground with his fiery eyes? Bewitch maidens so they slept forever? Madam victims with his banshee cry? Asked Derek. Oh no, much worse. Tam Lin took a toll from every maiden who entered the forest. What sort of toll? Asked Samantha. Well, any maiden who entered the forest had to give Tam Lin a slice of cake, said Nanny Piggins. What? Said Derek. I know, brutal, wasn't it? Said Nanny Piggins. What crueler act than taking a slice of cake from your victim? They'd probably been looking forward to eating it all day, but once they met Tam Lin, there'd be no elevensies for them. Everyone who entered his forest left feeling hungry. Really? Said Michael. Oh yes, said Nanny Piggins. I know this to be true, because my own distant cousin, Janet Piggins, was one of those women. And by woman, I of course mean pig. So what happened? Asked Samantha, trying to get the story back on track. Well, Janet's father had just bought the forest of Carterhaugh. It was an incredibly beautiful forest, but he got it cheap because, of course, it was cursed by fairies and no woman was safe to wander there. But Janet was a Piggins and she wasn't going to let a little thing like a centuries-old curse keep her from taking a nice walk in the sunshine. And it was a lovely forest. There were no wolves or huntsmen there to bother her. Even the acorns stayed firmly attached to the trees. She was just coming to a lovely pond in the centre of the forest when a fairy on horseback confronted her. Halt! Ordered the fairy. Any maiden who enters this forest must pay me a toll, for I am Tam Lin, the knight protector of the fairy queen. What sort of toll? Asked Janet. You must give me a slice of cake, declared Tam Lin. How dare you, said Janet. She lunged forward and stomped hard on Tam Lin's fairy foot. Ow, cried Tam Lin. You're a very naughty fairy, accused Janet, forcing young women to give you a slice of cake. I've never heard of such a diabolical crime. I only do it because I'm hungry, protested Tam Lin. I'm not allowed to leave the forest, and there are no cake shops here. And according to the curse, as the guardian of this forest, I'm not allowed to make cake either. Oh, well, that's awful too, said Janet. Who is forcing you to work in these unconscionable conditions? The fairy queen, said Tam Lin. Well, she sounds like a terrible employer, said Janet. Well, she's not so much an employer as a kidnapper, explained Tam Lin. When I was a wee toddler, I was riding behind my grandfather on his horse, and I slipped off. Before he could turn around, the fairy queen snatched me up and carried me away. She's raised me to be her knight and to guard her forest ever since. What a naughty monarch, said Janet. That's no way to hire staff. All right, I'll give you a slice of cake, but only because that's such a sad story. I need to eat a slice as well to cheer myself up. So Janet and Tam Lin sat down on a log together. Janet took out a family-sized chocolate mud cake. She never went anywhere without one in her pocket, just in case. She was a Piggins, after all. And she cut 2 generous slices, one for her and one for Tam Lin. And as soon as the first crumb touched Tam Lin's taste buds, he fell in love. He gobbled down the rest of the cake just to be sure all the other crumbs were as good as the first crumb, and they were. So naturally, as soon as he was finished, he threw himself on his knees and begged Janet to marry him. I'm not marrying you, said Janet. Oh, why not? Asked Tam Lin. We've only just met, said Janet. But I love you, said Tam Lin. You just love my cake, said Janet. Well, I do love your cake, agreed Tam Lin, but I love you as the maker of the cake even more. You're out of your mind, said Janet. I am not, said Tam Lin. I love cake. Everyone loves cake, said Janet. No, but I really, really love it, said Tam Lin. I love baking generally. I'm not allowed to make cake, but I do bake cookies, and as a baked goods connoisseur, I know how difficult it is to create an artwork as delicious as this fine chocolate mud cake. Janet must have looked sceptical at this point. If you don't believe me, said Tam Lin, try this. I baked it earlier. He pulled a chocolate chip cookie out of his pocket. A chocolate chip cookie, said Janet. How good could one cookie be? Just try it, urged Tam Lin. Janet tentatively tried a tiny nibble, and as soon as that first cookie crumb touched her taste buds, she fell in love too. They were both mind-blowingly over the moon in love with each other. Well, they fell in love with each other's cooking, but they loved the cooking so much that their love overflowed and made them love each other as people as well. So they got married and lived happily ever after, asked Samantha. Well, they did get married, agreed Nanny Piggins. Fortunately, there was a 24-hour wedding chapel in the forest. But the Fairy Queen would be very cross if she found out that her fairy knight had a wife. So Tam Lin and Janet had to keep their marriage secret. Janet went back to her father's home, promising to return to Tam Lin as soon as she was able. When she returned home, Janet's family did notice that she was glowing with happiness, but they did not guess it was because she was deeply in love and secretly married to a fairy. They just assumed she'd had a particularly nice slice of cake that day. But as the weeks passed, they grew suspicious, because Janet wouldn't eat anything. What, because she was pregnant and had morning sickness? Asked Samantha. No! What is it with you and babies? No, she wouldn't eat anything because all she wanted was Tam Lin's chocolate chip cookies. Compared to them, no other food tasted good. Eventually, Janet confessed the truth to her father. He was a very wise man. He understood how good a really good cookie can be when it's crunchy on the outside and cakey on the inside and just enough chocolate and sugar to make a diabetic slip into a hypoglycemic coma. My daughter, you must go to your husband, said the father. But if you do come back and visit, can you bring me one of his cookies? But the Fairy Queen will be angry, said Janet. Some things are worth being angered at, said the father wisely, if not entirely grammatically correctly. So Janet went back to the forest, and as soon as Tam Lin saw her, he was overjoyed. I'm so pleased to see you. Because you love me and my homemade chocolate cake? Asked Janet. Oh, yes, said Tam Lin, but also because I think the Fairy Queen is going to kill me. What did you do? Asked Janet. Oh, nothing, said Tam Lin. But it's Halloween tonight, and every 7 years the Fairy Queen must sacrifice one of her fairy knights to appease the dark forces. And this year, I think it's going to be me. Why you? Asked Janet. Well, last week the Fairy Queen got new carpet in her house, and I walked across it without taking my boots off. Oh dear, said Janet. And I just walked through the chicken coop, so there was a lot of muck involved. Yeah, she's definitely sacrificing you, said Janet. But I can't lose you now, not when I'm so in love with your cookies. I mean, you. There is one way you can save me, said Tam Lin. On Halloween night, the Fairy Queen will lead all her knights through the forest in a procession. I shall be riding my white horse, so I'll be easy to spot. You must hide yourself, and when I ride past, snatch me down and hold me tight. The Fairy Queen will use all her magic to try and get you to release me. Whatever happens, you must not let go, not until I tell you to. Well, that sounds simple enough, said Janet. It'll be very difficult and dangerous, warned Tam Lin. Some people, are worth fighting for, said Janet. And so, later that night, Janet was hiding in a bush when she saw torchlight approaching. She peered through the leaves and could see a long line of horses carrying all the fairy knights from across the magical realm, and at the front of the procession was the Fairy Queen herself, and she was beautiful. How beautiful? Asked Michael. 2, said Nanny Piggins. 2, as in the number 2, asked Samantha. No, 2 as in too much, said Nanny Piggins. How can you be too beautiful? Asked Derek. I don't know, said Nanny Piggins, and yet I am, and the Fairy Queen was too. Janet waited patiently in the bush, and as the white horse drew near, she leapt up and pulled Tam Lin down and grabbed hold of him. The Fairy Queen heard the ruckus and turned around. You there! Release my fairy knight! She demanded. No, I won't, cried Janet defiantly. But he is mine, railed the Fairy Queen. I kidnapped him first. You're not having him back, said Janet. So the Fairy Queen unleashed her fairy magic. Kapow! She transformed Tam Lin into a giant angry snake. He hissed at Janet and bit her arm, but Janet bravely clung on. So the Fairy Queen tried again. Kapow! She transformed Tam Lin into a vicious lion. But still Janet bravely clung tight, even as the lion roared and scraped at her skin. Next, kapow! She transformed Tam Lin into a giant scorpion who stung Janet. Kapow! Then a fox who wriggled and writhed. Kapow! Then a skunk who sprayed her with stink. Then finally, when nothing else she could think of would make Janet let go, the Fairy Queen transformed Tam Lin into a burning ember. The heat burned Janet's skin, but still she held her true love tightly. Tam Lin, in his ember form, called out, Now, Janet, release me! Throw me into the pond! "But can you swim?" asked Janet. "Just do it," said Tam Lin. Janet was getting some very nasty burns, so she did as she was told. She hurled the ember into the pond. The water sizzled and hissed as the ember sunk to the bottom. Then the water fell still. Janet began to wonder if she may have made a dreadful mistake, inciting the Fairy Queen into turning her husband into an ember and then throwing him into a pond. But just then, the water began to ripple. Then something broke the surface and started to emerge. It was a man. Tam Lin was no longer a fairy. He had transformed back into human form. "And was he handsome?" asked Samantha. "Who cares when you're that good at baking cookies?" demanded Nanny Piggins. Samantha frowned. She wasn't proud of herself for being superficial, but she was superficial nonetheless. "Of course he was handsome," said Nanny Piggins. Unfortunately, Janet didn't look so good after being savaged by a lion, a snake, and burnt by a giant ember. But Tam Lin truly loved her, and he rushed her to the nearest emergency room. And after months of recuperation in a burns hospital, Janet was as beautiful as ever, and she and Tam Lin shared cake and cookies for the rest of their days. The end. Time for bed. Now you children better get to sleep. I shall have to stay up late baking cakes. If you go into the forest tomorrow, I'll need to make sure you have enough provisions to bribe any rogue fairies you may meet along the way. All right, and that is the end of the story, so we'll leave it there. I hope you enjoyed that. And just remember, if you are in Sydney, Canberra or Hobart, the tickets to the Christmas show are on sale now. You can go to my website, rasprat.com, to find out the details. There's like upcoming events thing on the right-hand side, and you can click on the links for your city. All right, that's it for now. Until next time, goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.